Defense News is proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, we bring you more from the annual Defense News Conference. From the Space Force, we hear from the Vice Chief of Space Operations as he addresses the unique strategic challenges his department faces. Plus, the Air Force has launched a major reorganization as they prepare for potential great power competition. Two members of the top brass join us to discuss what steps they're taking to shape a future-ready force. Finally, how do you track missiles once they enter low Earth orbit? The director of the Space Development Agency is here to explain. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Diana Stancy. The recent Defense News Conference gathered top Pentagon and defense officials responsible for shaping what the future looks like for our forces on land, sea, air, and now space. General Michael Guetlein, Vice Chief of Space Operations for the Space Force, led things off with a talk about what it means for space to be contested by potential modern adversaries. Taking a page out of the Marine Manual, the Space Force has had to do a lot with a little, as the job before them far exceeds the budgets and capabilities currently available. General Guetlein makes a case for investing in an expanded infrastructure to protect the last frontier. Failing to keep pace with our adversaries could prove catastrophic. Here he is with more on the challenges that we face on the latest contested space, in space.
We are fundamentally dependent on space for every element of our way of life. Unfortunately, space is contested. Our potential adversaries are intent on denying our use of space for peace or for defense, and they are increasingly operating in a very unsafe and unprofessional manner. We must protect and defend freedom of exploration, freedom of navigation, and freedom of action in space. Your Space Force is doing just that, but the demand for our capabilities and our services far outpaces the resources we currently have available. The nation must invest more in space. Failure to do so could be devastating to all we hold dear. As highlighted in the 2024 Annual Threat Assessment by the U.S. intelligence community, our pacing challenges, the PRC and the Russian Federation, have fielded credible capabilities capable of challenging our space, our use of space, as well as our allies and partners' use of space. For example, the PRC has nearly 1,000 satellites in orbit, about 500 of which are capable of tracking and targeting our joint and coalition forces. Our competitors also demonstrated deployment of offensive capabilities that can target and destroy space systems in all orbital regimes. In fact, their actions have demonstrated a willingness to defy international norms of behavior in an unsafe and unprofessional manner. These are not just accusations. As many of you have heard, Russia is developing an anti-satellite capability in space designed to carry a nuclear weapon. What righteous purpose could there be for placing a nuke in space? There isn't one, none whatsoever. What they want is to instill fear and to dominate space, and through it, control every other domain, air, land, and sea. Make no mistake, whoever controls space controls the future. There are three tenets to competitive endurance. First, we must avoid operational surprise. This means we must maintain awareness of what's happening in space at all times. Second, we must deny first mover advantage. Like I said, space is vast and it is dark, and it can be hard to attribute an action to ill will until it is too late, and we have lost the operational advantage to defend ourselves. We must make unwarned attack impractical and self-defeating. The finite tenet we must conduct is responsible counter-space campaigning. This means we must develop capabilities to protect and defend ourselves, but in doing so, we need to demonstrate safe and professional behavior in alignment with international norms of behavior, and we must work hard to protect the environment from additional pollution that could jeopardize the use of space for generations to come. So that is our playbook in a nutshell. Avoid operational surprise, deny first mover advantage, and conduct responsible counter-space campaigning. We know we need the ability to protect and defend ourselves. That wasn't built into our legacy systems because space was benign and we never really worried about it. So now how do I go back and protect those capabilities? We know we have to guarantee the services that the nation relies on every single day, for example, GPS. There's one study out there that says 15 minutes without GPS and this nation would be at $1.5 billion hit to the economy, and it would dwarf anything that we've seen since COVID. That is a large impact. But when you try to explain it to the public and explain, hey, why do I care? Ask them how they got wherever they are today. They followed a map on their phone that was driven by GPS. They probably stopped and got gas that was driven by an ATM machine that is aligned to the GPS signal. If we lose GPS in this nation, we can't get crops out of the field. I can't get goods off the shelf. I can't get goods off the boat. I can't get goods to the shelf. I can't get ambulances to your house, and you can't travel. That is a significant impact to our day-to-day life and some of the freedoms that we take for granted every single day. And that's just GPS, the Global Positioning System. That's just one system of many.
If the picture of a future Air Force was once of droves of pilots scouring the skies, technology has upended that vision. Now, the future is a little less Top Gun, a little more Skynet, as the force looks to leverage artificial intelligence to maintain an edge. Two top commanders joined us at Defense News Conference to talk about that and other issues faced by the force as it tries to evolve for future fights.
The entire point of the acquisition side is to put, weapons, tools, systems in the hand of the warfighter. What is this new approach going to mean for the warfighter in the field?
The Undersecretary, Mr. Hunter's team, and I are deeply, deeply involved in looking at our requirements, making sure that we revalidate all the requirements, and we can trace every single one of them back to either presidential guidance or departmental guidance for things like safety, security, purity, survivability, all the things that you would want in a system that you're going to rely on to keep the nation safe through effective deterrence. Because we have designed platforms to do missions and we've focused on platform level integration, we tend to get affixed by the prefix. What I mean by that is, what do we do with airplanes that start with a C? Well, we carry cargo because they start with a C. What do we do with airplanes that start with a B? Well, we drop bombs. Why? Because it starts with a B. And, in an Air Force where we have launched cruise missiles out of the back of C-17s and dropped people out of the bomb bay of, B-24s and things of that nature, I don't even know what a cargo airplane is or a bomber is or a fighter is. I know what the mission that we have to get done is.
I'm sorry, what were you going to say, sir?
Well, yeah, and I think one other thing that this mode of analysis helps us do is to really set priorities. So, we know that we need to move fast because we have a pacing threat that is moving at a very rapid pace. But moving fast in and of itself doesn't necessarily help us if we're not moving fast with the right capabilities in the right direction. Right? We have to understand where to pick and choose. And so my exemplar of moving fast is our Collaborative Combat Aircraft program, where we went essentially from initial inception and first funding to vendors bending metal in the space of 2 years, which is pretty good by government standards. And we were able to do that because we built on a foundation. We built on a foundation of an architecture. We built on a foundation of a network that allowed us to connect to vendors. We built on a foundation of mission systems work that had already been done. And so we had that foundation ready to go. Well, that's great. How many of those foundations do I need? Where do I need them? What do I need as a technical foundation for the ISR that I'm going to need to perform to do moving target indication at scale? So understanding where do I need to go build more of those foundations, more of those technical architectures, more of those network architectures is informed by this collaboration and this work between the operational acquisition community to decompose mission threads and understand this is where we need to go build that foundation so that we can move fast today, but we can, as importantly, move fast in the coming decades to field new capability as we discern that it's necessary.
Air Force contracted with Anduril and General Atomics for the first increment of CCAs. And I believe you said you were planning to decide on a contract to actually produce the first increment in FY26, if I recall correctly. How's that effort going, and what progress have you seen to help you decide, that might help you decide where you're going to land in FY26 as far as producing them?
Let me talk a little bit about sort of how does the contracting approach work. And this is something that I have sort of loosely called a next generation acquisition model of how do we want to be more continuous? How do we get that continuous competition that I've talked about that's going to drive innovation? How do we make sure we have the long-term capability development happening? And it's through these large vendor pools. Well, what's a large vendor pool? In essence, in contracting terms, it's a large IDIQ contract where we have relationships with multiple contractors. We give them individual, tasks to go perform, and we can award options. It doesn't end. Usually they're longer running contracts. There's no, it doesn't necessarily end on a given date because you can always issue a new task. It's highly competitive at the task level. It's highly competitive in folks getting into the vendor pool, but it doesn't lend itself to these big high stakes winner take all, 30 years franchise for someone when they win, because you always have that option within the vendor pool to go to another vendor to do the work that you need to do that you just learned about or that's coming around the corner.
When we return, fitness trackers, watches, phones, all of these devices can produce signatures that can reveal movements of troops on the modern battlefield. See how the Pentagon is looking to deal with the threat. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Diana Stancy. The modern battlefield boasts an assortment of new and emerging technologies meant to aid today's warfighters. But that same tech also offers a variety of signals and sensors that could reveal troops' locations to an enemy. Soldiers at the Joint Readiness Training Center in Fort Johnson, Louisiana, are combating this complex obstacle with simple and inexpensive methods. In a recent exercise, troops at the JRTC sparred with a simulated enemy nicknamed Geronimo. Their time in the field proved that a simple Raspberry Pi can disorient the enemy and force them to waste resources on decoy signals. During our recent visit, Captain Charles O'Hagan said a big problem Geronimo poses is finding signals from troops' personal devices, printers, and run-of-the-mill Wi-Fi connections.
So here I have a MiFi puck that came with the integrated tactical network systems we have, and for accountability reasons or whatnot, we would name them 2BCT TOC 1 or TOC 2. And then during that January rotation, Geronimo has a capability known as the Grasshopper. It picks up Wi-Fi and Bluetooth SSIDs and naming conventions, so it's too easy to target. There's two MiFi pucks that have 2BCT TOC. There's a printer that says 2BCT TOC. Let's tip and cue, small UAS platform to get eyes on this CP and then call for fire on it or develop the situation more.
With typical connections and naming conventions out of the picture, the Army assessed options to not only fix the problem, but turn it against the adversary. Using pieces of cheap tech, they created decoy signals that pretend to be soldiers' Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connections, hoping to confuse the enemy.
We created these Raspberry Pis. So it's a Raspberry Pi and then a SD card, and that's what gives it the SSID, and then the power source is what emits the SSID. The most expensive part is the power source. So really we're looking at under $50 for a whole set, which is not about 9 decoys. And we're able to program them with SSIDs such as 2BCT TOC or Charlie O'Hagan's iPhone, and then put those in the battlefield. So when Geronimo overflew us, they would not have a clear picture of what we look like on the battlefield. And that worked during the JFE. Geronimo launched artillery into dirt because there was decoys there that they wanted to destroy.
Given the low price of these decoys, O'Hagan also noted that they could be abandoned in real-life battlefield situations.
Here we're going to go back and get them, but at the end of the day they're inexpensive. Real world, we just leave them. The batteries will die. You could also set the batteries for a certain amount of time depending on how long you're trying to deceive. And the whole thing is deception is protection for us.
It's one thing to hide from the enemy, but troops at the JRTC also need to be able to detect the opposition. For that, they employed small drones, Wi-Fi adapters, and even duct tape to recreate the enemy's Grasshopper capability.
So we recreated the Grasshopper. We call it the Signal Harvest because of course you have to change the name. It's a Skydio, it's a quadcopter. It's small. SUAS has a flight time of 20 to 30 minutes depending on the payload. We have a Wi-Fi adapter here. There's a Raspberry 4 within this case and then a power source. For the Signal Harvest itself, started off ground-based, and during Operation Lethal Eagle in April, we were using zip ties and duct tape to get this onto our newly fielded Skydios and trying to sense the enemy through the EMS.
These simple solutions are all part of a new Army initiative dubbed Transformation in Contact, a tactic that challenges soldiers to adapt to real-world problems in real time on the training field, all with the task of being painfully light and disproportionately lethal. For more coverage on initiatives at the JRTC, head to ArmyTimes.com. After the break, our financial expert from Navy Federal Credit Union is back with advice for those entering the workforce for the first time. Don't go away. Welcome back. Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union is here with advice for those entering the workforce for the first time to help them set themselves up for future financial success.
So you finally landed your first real job. Congrats, that's a huge accomplishment. Entering the workforce comes with a lot of change and new responsibilities. Now that you'll be getting a steady paycheck, if you haven't been honing your next best money moves, now would be a good time to start. Many employers offer retirement benefits, and if they have a 401k match, take it. Don't leave good money on the table. Next, know your budget, meaning always know where your money is going. Subtract bills and other necessary expenses from your pay and try to save what's left. Better yet, treat saving like a bill and put it on auto transfer directly to your savings account. The expert move is establishing an emergency fund with up to 3 months of living expenses at all times. Then start to build your credit. Having a good credit history helps you to qualify for loans, credit cards, and even apartments. So if you don't have one, maybe open a credit card and pay it on time every time. The goal is to develop healthy spending, saving, and credit habits. It may take a bit of time, but you can do it. And following these basic money moves will put you firmly on a path to winning at your work life and otherwise.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, send up a periscope and scan the horizon for militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the smartest service member in the base gym, sign up for our early bird brief, compiled each morning to bring you the most recent headlines, even on leg day. Lastly, if social media is where you collect open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And just like most junior troops, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. After the break, how do you track missile launches once they enter low Earth orbit? The director of the Space Development Agency is here to explain. Stay with us. Welcome back. To keep the homeland safe from foreign attacks, the Space Development Agency has a difficult job. They've got to help the interceptor units hit a missile with a missile. To perform that difficult task and others, they are constantly improving their satellite and other infrastructure, sending better hardware aloft to patrol the space domain. For the latest on their mission, the director of the SDA was on hand at the Defense News Conference to talk about the latest in research and the importance of recent successes.
I wanted to first start just talking a little bit about kind of what you've already launched.
Sure.
And you started last year in the spring launching kind of the first tranche of satellites, Tranche 0, missile warning and tracking, and also data transport satellites. As of February, there's 27 in orbit.
Right.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about kind of what you're seeing from those first satellites, how they're operating, how they're being integrated in demos, those types of things.
What we wanted to demonstrate on Tranche 0, the big questions on whether or not we could do proliferated constellations for this whole architecture. Number one, could we in fact do Link 16 from space? That's the biggest question, right? Because that is what we are predicating the ability to be able to get the tactical data directly to the warfighter without any impact to their user equipment. Link 16 from space had never been done before. There were some demonstrations that were supposed to fly ahead of us, but we ended up getting ahead of them. So we were the first one. So we were pretty nervous about that. We demonstrated that successfully. We demonstrated that with our Australian partners to show that we really collaborate with our allies. And we've talked about that. What we haven't really announced publicly, we had a little a LinkedIn post on it, but just to make sure everyone's aware, not only did we go down to our allies with radios in Australia, but we also went down to a carrier. The U.S. Navy operated that for us and did this demonstration in conjunction with some military testing with us. Went down to the carrier, and we also went down to an aircraft that was on the deck of the carrier at the time, which is actually more difficult than if it were actually flying. So we were pretty happy with that. We were able to check the box and say that Link 16 from space is a doable do, and now we have confidence. The next big poll that we needed to beat down was, can you in fact do the missile tracking mission from LEO? There was a lot of debate on that. MDA, to their credit, did an inordinate amount of work to demonstrate that you could do it in simulations. They did a lot of simulations that were very realistic, using real flight hardware, but people still questioned it, right? You always question simulations because they thought that the clutter environment at LEO is so much different than what you experience when you're a GEO and you're staring over a space. They assumed that it would be extremely difficult to be able to pull out a dim missile in flight from LEO as you're moving, as you're screaming across. We demonstrated that successfully. We've been able to detect a lot of different missile launches. We've been able to detect rocket launches. We were able to detect the Starship reentry. A lot of activity. We were able to form that on 2D tracks using the algorithms that MDA developed and show that, yes, you could in fact do this in real time and pass those data up. So knock that poll down, demonstrate that.
I wanted to ask too a little bit about the missile warning, missile track demos that you referenced. I know MDA has talked about their HBTSS satellites tracking a hypersonic flight test.
Right.
Have the other SDA missile warning and tracking satellites conducted or been able to track a hypersonic test, or can you speak at all to?
So we've with our right now we have 8 of the tracking satellites up. The 4 SpaceX ones are operational. The 4 L3 Harris ones are still going through test and checkout. We actually expect to start collecting data with them this month. So with those 4 satellites on orbit, the 4 operational ones, you just don't have a lot of opportunities to to be overhead during tests. So all of the targets that I've mentioned that we've collected on have been targets of opportunity to date. The Starship reentry, as I mentioned. I can't really talk about the other missile launches that we've detected, but those were all targets of opportunity. We just happen to be overhead collecting. So because of the fact that we only have those 4 satellites operating, we're not easy to synchronize with those Missile Defense Agency tests. MDA has been very cooperative with us and tried to time their tests when we were overhead, but just due to different situations, primarily with weather forcing them either to the end or the beginning of a launch window where we didn't have visibility, we haven't been able to get coverage to date.
Well, that's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.